Hey everyone! Before we get started, I'm inclined to warn you that this episode will be discussing the serious topic of suicide. It plays a significant part in this episode because the film being analyzed centers around murders manipulated to look like suicides. If anyone listening is struggling with thoughts of suicide, please consider calling the suicide hotline in your area. With that out of the way, on with the episode. Dear Diary, I must have landed in Oz because ding dong, the witch is dead. I guess I should start from the beginning. I went to homeroom this morning and everyone was talking about Heather Chandler. Because of course they were. When aren't the Heathers at the center of this school? If they aren't talking about her, they're talking about Heather Duke or Heather McNamara. It's like the student body revolves around them, even in death. That's right. Heather Chandler died. They said that her parents found her on Sunday night dead as a doornail, with a suicide note and everything. I thought they'd cancel classes, but nope. I still had to take trigonometry. Gag me with a spoon. What's worse is that they scheduled some assembly tomorrow with a lame suicide prevention group. They even got this old cop to come in and bore us with stories. Some guy named Columbus or Columbine or whatever. Thanks a lot, Heather. A lot of students at Westerberg High believe that Heather Chandler killed herself. The whole town is convinced of this, all except for Lieutenant Columbo. Can Columbo figure out what really happened to Heather Chandler? Can Columbo prevent the next killer fad to hit Sherwood, Ohio? Can Columbo solve this before he's found with a suicide note? Can Columbo crack the case? Hello and welcome to another episode of Can Columbo Crack the Case? I'm your host, Jackson, and today we're covering the cult classic Heathers and the murder of Heather Chandler. First responders assumed Heather took her own life since they found a suicide note with her body, but this is what the murderers want them to think. That's right, plural. For you see, there's a member of the Heathers we haven't discussed yet, Veronica Sawyer. She's a new addition to the clique who recently got on the victim's bad side. After she got drunk and threw up on Heather at a college party, Heather vowed to destroy Veronica's reputation. You'd think that these so-called friends would be able to patch things up, but contrary to popular belief, they were not as close as they seemed. Veronica wasn't happy with her new friends and wanted to go back to her old ones, while Heather was as vindictive as she was vain. Enter JD, a new student who made a name for himself after pulling a gun on two jocks in the cafeteria. It only shot blanks, but still. JD convinced Veronica to strike first and pull a prank on Heather. Nothing major, just tricking her into drinking something gross so she'll puke her guts out. They wound up giving her a mug full of drain cleaner, which killed her almost immediately. It was an accident, but since the deed was done and no one would believe them, Veronica and JD staged it to look like a suicide. They managed to fool the local authorities, but can they pull the wool over Columbo's eyes? Let's find out. Columbo arrives to find Heather's house taped off, and the body being taken to the coroner's. He goes upstairs to the victim's bedroom and takes a look around the crime scene. Aside from the garishly pink color scheme, what stands out to him is the taped off shattered coffee table and a mug with traces of a blue substance. Based on where the body was found and the glass shards beneath her, the police surmised that she was standing over the coffee table and fell forward when she died. The lack of cuts suggests the glass didn't cause her to bleed out, so that's ruled out as a cause of death. Photos have already been taken of the corpse, which Columbo takes a moment to examine them and get an idea of what the victim looked like. Eventually, another officer will ask for the photos back. Columbo hands them over and mentions what a nice robe the victim was wearing. He got his wife a robe just like that as an anniversary present. She says it's the comfiest thing in her wardrobe, wears it every morning and evening. Columbo finds it strange that the victim wore it and stood over by the table of all places. The other officer doesn't see why that's so strange, so Columbo elaborates. Clearly, Heather had put some thought into this. She had makeup on, she wore her comfiest robe, and took the time to put her thoughts in a final note. She was going to go out in style. The mug on the floor suggests she drank something poisonous, but they won't know until the coroner's report comes in. If she did, why wouldn't she drink from the comfort of her bed? Why make her last moments more painful and ruin all of her work making herself look good? The other officer doesn't have an answer. Columbo figures that they may never know. He decides it's time for him to take his leave. But there's one more thing. He asks the other officer if that blue stuff looks like drain cleaner or dish soap. It's hard to say, so the officer just shrugs. Columbo suggests they look around to see if there's any more of that stuff. With that, he heads out and drives to the school for his presentation. Alright, let's review what Columbo learned from the crime scene. For starters, he knows where the victim died and how. The coroner's report should confirm his suspicions about what the victim ingested. However, there isn't any hard evidence to suggest that this was anything other than suicide. The suicide note was removed before Columbo could question its authenticity, so all he has to work with is a hunch. And it's not like Veronica or JD left any damning evidence. If they had, the alarm would have gone off by. Perhaps I spoke too soon. That was the whoopsie alarm. It sounds off whenever the killer, or killers, make a big mistake. If you paid close attention to the movie, you'll notice that Veronica and JD touch a lot of stuff in Heather's house. From the dresser, to the suicide note, to the jug of drain cleaner. Both of their fingerprints would be everywhere. To their credit, it's not like they planned to kill her. It doesn't excuse the heinous crime they committed, but it's unfair to compare them to professional assassins or seasoned serial killers. This is suspicious, but the case is far from over. Given the time this takes place, the police would need to manually go through a database to compare the prints with ones they have on file, which is definitely going to take some time. Maybe if they start by searching for files on Heather's family and friends, they might pull up something on Veronica, assuming she's in their database. They wouldn't think to check for JD. He has no connection to any of the Heathers. If they brought in Veronica for questioning, there's a good chance she would confess and rat out JD. There's also a good chance JD could talk his way out of this and pin the whole thing on Veronica. He could lie and say that he was secretly seeing Heather and she was too embarrassed to make their relationship public, justifying why his prints were at the scene of the crime. In order for Columbo to crack this case, he needs to arrest the culprits and get a guaranteed conviction, with little to no room for doubt. All he can do now is keep his ear to the ground and see if he can learn any information while he's at the school. Teens are prone to gossip and sure to let something slip. But first, let's go over our key players for this case. We're leaving Heather Chandler's parents off the list since they have an alibi, which means Heather Duke and Heather McNamara start us off. They were close friends with the victim and should know their departed friend better than anyone. There's also Veronica Sawyer, who was also close to the victim. But was she as close as the other Heathers? There's also that transfer student, Jason Dean, who caused quite a stir the other day with Kurt Kelly and Ram Sweeney, the sexist homophobic football players. Rumor has it they've been really close with Veronica lately. Finally, we have Martha, an overweight girl who has been the victim of the Heathers' recent pranks. Could she be out for revenge? Will she even show up on Columbo's radar? We'll see. For now, let's hurry on over to the high school. I don't know about the rest of you, but I can't afford to be late again. Despite the untimely passing of Heather, school is still in session and life goes on. Aside from one teacher, the rest of the staff aren't fazed by Heather's death. Columbo uses this time to ask around and see which of the students was closest to her. He tells everyone that they plan to honor Heather at the assembly with a eulogy, and he wants to know what they thought of her. The general consensus is that she was seemingly beloved by everyone. I say seemingly considering he's seen nothing but dry eyes all day. You'd think one of her many dear friends would still be sniffling or shedding a tear. The only time they seem heartbroken is when they're being interviewed by the local news team. During his investigation, he'd most likely hear that the school newspaper has been asking about Heather too. Columbo stops by their club room and sees the students hard at work, along with the yearbook spread they have dedicated to Heather. Columbo thinks that's sweet and commends them for their hard work. He looks over the photos they have, but fails to find any featuring her with her myriad of supposed friends. Speaking of myriad, her suicide note is included in the spread, providing Columbo with a chance to read it. While he glosses it over, a member of the newspaper mentions that they plan to add more once they talk to the other Heathers. It's here that Columbo would learn about Heather Duke, Heather McNamara, and Veronica Sawyer, 3 girls who helped the late Heather Chandler conduct student polls for the paper. Once Columbo finishes copying what's written on the suicide note, he thanks the kids for their time and goes looking for the Heathers. It's a close one, but he manages to catch Veronica right as she leaves her last class. He'd tell her he's working with the group hosting the suicide prevention assembly and was hoping she could help him out with something. It'll only take a minute. Veronica agrees, but it's obvious her mind is elsewhere. They go out in front of the school, and Columbo says he's been tasked with writing up a quick eulogy for tomorrow's assembly about Heather. So he asked around to get a good idea of what Heather was like. The problem is, everyone claims they were Heather's friend. He can't tell who's telling the truth. He heard that Veronica worked with Heather in the school's newspaper and figured she could provide some insight. It's a touchy subject, but Veronica does her best. She describes Heather just like all the other students did: pretty, fashionable, stylish, but then she adds trusting and daring. When he asks what she means by that, Veronica says Heather always gave people the benefit of the doubt. Columbo likes that. He says most people would consider that a bad trait, like she's gullible. He tells her she's been a great help and cleared up something that's been bothering him. When Veronica asks what he's talking about, Columbo explains that he visited the crime scene that morning. He thought the note they found was suspicious, but the police told him it had to be suicide. There wasn't any sign of a break in, but they also said the back door was unlocked. He thought maybe Heather left it unlocked for someone to come in, but now he sees that she wasn't the cautious type. She probably thought no one would break in. That kind of stuff doesn't happen often in towns like this. Columbo thanks her for her time and lets her go. He saw a girl looking at them impatiently and assumed she was Veronica's friend. He doesn't want to take up any more of her time. Veronica leaves with her friend to discuss setting up a double date, while Columbo gets to work on his eulogy. You'd think after spending an entire day at school, Columbo would have learned more, but at least we have a lead. We've established that there wasn't any sign of a break-in at Heather's house, but the patio door was unlocked. We also learned about the Heathers, three girls who were close with the victim. Did they know about the patio door? The autopsy report should be ready, and we can confirm that Heather died around 8 or 9 a.m. from consuming drain cleaner. There's no bruises or anything to suggest she was forced to drink it. There's also traces of alcohol still left in her system. Odds are the police haven't figured out whose fingerprints were on the drain cleaner and still believe Heather killed herself. However, there's plenty of evidence to suggest someone visited her that morning. The evidence is circumstantial at best, but enough to spark Columbo's curiosity. The next step is to figure out Heather's whereabouts leading up to her demise. One of Heather's so-called friends should be able to provide some insight, but good luck getting teens to confess to cops. It could be worse. He could be studying for midterms. The assembly goes off without a hitch. Not that any of the high schoolers care. They're quietly waiting to be excused so they can go to lunch. Okay, maybe quietly isn't the right word. There's a lot of chitter chatter and gossiping going around. Columbo overhears some of the chatter from the peanut gallery and a nasty new rumor about Veronica. When the assembly is over, he goes looking for Veronica. Eventually, he catches her storming out of the newspaper club in a huff. He pulls her aside and asks if he could have another moment of her time. Veronica isn't interested, but Columbo insists. He can tell she's upset and suspects it has something to do with that awful rumor going around. The one regarding her and two members of the football team, Kurt and Ram. Veronica doesn't answer, but her silence speaks volumes. Columbo assures her that he doesn't believe that kind of gossip. He understands how harmful the rumor mill can be, and wants to make sure she doesn't do anything drastic. While she appreciates what he's trying to do, Veronica has to go. He understands and will let her go after she answers one more question for him. They found traces of alcohol in Heather's system, but no beer at her house. He asks Veronica if Heather went out to a party or something, but Veronica denies any knowledge of this. He apologizes for bringing up a touchy subject. He was just wondering who spent the night with Heather. He tells her she's free to go, but Veronica stops him to ask what he meant by that. Columbo says he shouldn't be revealing this sort of stuff, but tells her they found out that morning she died from drinking drain cleaner. They found two sets of prints on the only jug of the stuff in her house, but failed to identify who the prints belonged to. All they know is that they aren't Heather's or her parents'. That's why he thought someone spent the night. How else could Heather pour herself a cup of drain cleaner without touching the bottle? Veronica is too stunned to give a response. Columbo can't make heads or tails of it either. It's pretty suspicious, but there's bound to be an explanation. For all he knows, the police have already found a match and are resolving this as they speak. He thanks her again for her time and excuses himself. Veronica said she had plans, and he doesn't want to hold her up any longer. I think it's safe to say that Columbo knows that this suicide has foul play written all over it. With the autopsy report updated and still no matches for the fingerprints, this suicide is looking less like a suicide by the minute. It's not enough to warrant a full scale investigation, but it's getting close. I imagine Columbo suspects Veronica, but lacks any definitive proof or motive, so he can't connect her to Heather just yet. What is certain is that Veronica has been rattled by her recent encounter with Columbo, so much so that I bet she'll tell JD about it and put Columbo on his radar. Our lieutenant is wading into dangerous territory. If he's not careful, he might end up like Ram and Kurt. I've just received word that the two football players were found dead in the forest, along with a suicide note. It doesn't take long for the news to leak, and the revelation that they were closeted lovers. The second Columbo hears about this, he'd rush out to the crime scene as fast as his dilapidated convertible will go. He'd arrive just as the ambulance does and find two officers, Milner and McCord, securing the scene. They tell him they were parked nearby taking a smoke break when Milner thought he heard a gunshot. Since McCord didn't say anything, Milner figured it was his imagination. But then a minute later, Milner definitely heard another gunshot, and they went to investigate. They found Kurt and Rem as they are now, lying on the ground with only their underwear and socks on. Columbo can see that Ram has a bullet hole in his neck, while Kurt has one in his chest. According to the suicide note found with them, the two couldn't stand to live in a world where they had to hide their love. Their clothes were found nearby, along with two handguns and a bag full of fruity items, as one of the detectives puts it, including a bottle of mineral water. As far as the officers are concerned, this is an open and shut case. Columbo disagrees. He agrees that the boys were shot by someone from a distance, but McCord said he heard two gunshots, so that means the boys didn't fire at the same time. But it's also clear that both shots killed the boys instantly. So if Kurt shot Ram first, or vice versa, who was left to fire the second shot? The officers sheepishly admit he has a point, but remind him that they thought they heard a second gunshot. Maybe that first noise didn't happen, and the second shot was the boys firing at the same time. Columbo admits that is possible, but it raises another question. He wonders if they can figure out when the guys took their clothes off. It's a weird question that the officers don't see the point of. Columbo points out that Kurt's socks have dirt on the soles, while Ram's socks don't. If they took their clothes off out here at the same time, that would mean Kurt was moving around after he stripped, maybe even running. Who takes a jog right before they take their own life? Milner tells Columbo he's overthinking it. Maybe Kurt's socks were dirty before they got there. That could be true, but there's one other thing bothering Columbo. That fruity drink the guys were found with? It's unopened. Why didn't they drink it? Milner thinks he has an answer. Someone could have spotted the boys and made them panic, like that couple he saw earlier. Columbo asks Milner to explain himself. Milner tells Columbo that there was a car parked down the trail with a couple of lovers going at it inside. Columbo then asks Milner if it ever occurred to him that those teens might have been witnesses, or even suspects. By this point, the paramedics have stopped prepping the stretcher to stare in disbelief at this level of incompetency. Milner, embarrassed, would say it didn't dawn at him at the time. Columbo pinches the bridge of his nose, takes a second, and then asks if McCord could show him what else was in that bag. Wow. We haven't even gotten the coroner's report, and Columbo has already gotten a lot of evidence to work with. We've got another suicide note, two smoking guns, the dirty socks, and a bag full of unusual items, including an issue of Stud Puppy, a candy dish, a Joan Crawford postcard, some mascara, and the unopened bottle of mineral water. A ballistics report on the guns should be ready in a day or two. As for the bag, Columbo would immediately suspect something is off. It's one thing to bring a last snack or drink, but why would they bring a gay magazine, a postcard, and some makeup. They didn't even use the makeup. Also, I assume gay magazines aren't something you just come across in Ohio during the 80s. There can't be that many stores that sell them in a town like this. Columbo could look them up and visit them to see if any of these stores sold any copies recently. Now, I know what you're thinking. What gay business owner in the 80s would tell a cop who they've sold gay magazines to? Normally, they wouldn't. But this is Columbo we're talking about. If anyone can get them to talk, it's him. He may have to turn down some silver foxes in the process. By now, I think Columbo would suspect that the suicides are connected. The first death had two sets of unidentified fingerprints, and the second and third deaths had an unidentified couple. Could a duo be behind these? The events also have another thing in common, a connection to Veronica Sawyer. Heather was Veronica's friend, and then there were rumors about Veronica, Kurt, and Ram. There's enough to make her a prime suspect, but nothing to pin the crimes on her, or indicate who her accomplice is. It would be nice to know where JD got the guns. The film doesn't say, so it's up to speculation. Either they belonged to his dad and would thus be registered under his name, or JD acquired them through illegitimate channels with no way to trace them. It would be unfair to assume it's the former and score an easy win. What we can infer is that the guns aren't registered to Kurt, Ram, or anyone in their family. We're so close to cracking this case. I could feel it. Maybe we need to take a break and clear our head. Someone needs to go pick up Heather's belongings from her locker. Maybe if Columbo's lucky, he might run into Veronica and see how she's holding up. No sign of Veronica, but Columbo does find Heather's locker wide open. The Keep Out sticker is torn off, and most of the locker's contents haven't been touched. Columbo will have to report this later. For now, he unloads the contents into a box and carries it out to his car. It's a bit of a walk, but it's good exercise. The tricky part is opening the trunk of his car while holding the box. Lucky for him, a student passing by offers to help him, a guy dressed in black with an earring. Columbo thanks him and he hands the box off to him, while Columbo gets his keys out. The teen heard that a cop has been talking to students about the recent suicides. Columbo admits that's him and asks if something is bothering the boy. As a matter of fact, there is. A friend of his spoke with Columbo, and after they talked, she started wondering if someone killed her classmates. Columbo didn't mean to upset this friend of his and realizes he never got the kid's name. The guy calls himself JD and says he wants to set things straight. He just wants to confirm that the police have ruled all those deaths as suicides and not murders. Columbo wishes he could give an official statement, but to tell the truth, it's still unclear what they're dealing with. JD doesn't understand what the issue is. Everyone at school heard all the victims left a suicide note. This is true, but there are little things that don't add up. Like how Heather got all dressed up for her death, only to slam face first into a table. JD admits that Heather wasn't exactly valedictorian material. It could have been an oversight. That makes sense, but the football players are different. Nothing about their deaths makes sense. JD doesn't see the problem. Two gay guys couldn't take hiding in the closet anymore, so they pulled a Romeo and Juliet. Columbo points out Romeo and Juliet didn't bring a bag of unused gay paraphernalia when they died together. JD says he's surprised. He never heard anything about a bag. Columbo tells him there isn't anything special, just a gay magazine, some snacks, and makeup. The funny thing is, Columbo checked every place that sold gay magazines. Turns out there aren't that many in the county. None of them saw those guys buy one, so how'd that magazine end up in their bag? JD shrugs and suggests they had it delivered to one of their houses or bought it off someone. That makes sense to Columbo, but there's something big that's bothering him. It's probably nothing, but two sets of unidentified prints were found at Heather's place, and then two teens were spotted kissing in the forest shortly after Kurt and Ram were found dead. JD asks if Columbo thinks a student killed them. Columbo didn't mean to insinuate anything. All he meant was those details made him consider the possibility of two murderers. Columbo admits he has a problem when it comes to sharing his theories on cases. That must be how JD's friend got the wrong idea. Columbo would be happy to clear things up if JD told him who this friend was, but JD says it's not necessary. He thanks JD for helping him load up his car. Before he goes, he was wondering what JD's relation to Heather Chandler was. JD said that she was just another classmate, but Columbo points out JD said she wasn't valedictorian material. How did he know that? JD hastily answers that she looked like someone who had more beauty than brains. Columbo finds that interesting. He can't recall anyone in the school who felt that way. He then gets into his old car, backs out, and drives away, waving to JD before he hits the road. At long last, Columbo has finally met JD. Given how JD avoids the limelight, it makes sense Columbo wouldn't bump into him naturally. I'm sure Veronica already informed JD that a cop was looking into the suicides. He probably didn't talk to Columbo sooner because JD was busy plotting Kurt and Ram's deaths and waited to see if Columbo would approach Veronica again. After that encounter, I'm sure Columbo would be suspicious of JD and start digging some dirt on him. Shouldn't take too long to hear about his little cafeteria incident. I wish I could say that Columbo could find JD's prints on file, but the film doesn't show whether JD was arrested after pulling a gun out at lunch. He should be, but the film says he only got suspended. Man, the 80s were a weird time. By now, Columbo would consider the possibility that Veronica and JD worked together to kill Heather, Kurt, and Ram. He's got no hard evidence, but maybe he can find something before another suicide gets announced. Um, yeah, I don't have a funny segue for this next bit. At least, nothing that isn't in incredibly poor taste. By now, word has already spread about Martha Dunstock, another high school student from Veronica's school who walked into traffic and was hit by a car. She was found with a suicide note, but she's different from the other reported suicides. Mainly because this wasn't staged by JD or Veronica. This is the film's first actual suicide attempt. Martha doesn't play a big role in the story, but she is an example of the toll bullying can have on someone with body issues and low self esteem. Thankfully, she survived her experience and has been rushed to a hospital. What also makes her suicide different is that she survived, and that's why Columbo rushes to pay her a visit the second he finds out. Explaining the situation Columbo is in to Martha isn't going to be easy, especially when she already has so much on her plate. Even so, Columbo sits down in her hospital room and summarizes why he came to talk to her. He wants to understand why she walked into traffic and if anyone put her up to it. Unfortunately, Martha says she did it of her own free will. She couldn't take it anymore. She was unhappy with how ugly she was. No guy would ever ask her out. She was never going to be one of the popular girls. She was going to grow old and end up like one of those cat ladies. Martha saw no reason to keep going, if that was what waited for her. Columbo tells her that no one knows what the future has in store. He's known a lot of people who don't look anything like they did back in high school. Take his wife, for instance. She wasn't the prettiest petunia back then, but she grew out of it. Even if that wasn't the case, there are people that are worried about her. They're going to be so relieved to see Martha didn't kick the bucket. Her parents are probably bawling their eyes out, happy to know their baby girl is still kicking. Martha appreciates what he's trying to do, but isn't convinced that anyone is worried about her. She doesn't have any friends. The other teens mock her and play mean pranks. They even gave her a phony love letter. Columbo is sorry to hear that, but he's also curious who wrote the letter. Martha doesn't know, but it was pretty convincing. She really thought Ram was interested in her. Columbo clarifies that one of her classmates is capable of perfectly copying another student's handwriting, and she says yes. He then asks if she'd be willing to list all of the students that have previously bullied her. When she asks why, he says it's because it would be a big help in catching someone incredibly dangerous. Martha would try to name as many students that she could think of. He thanks her for her time and takes off for the precinct. It's a pain having to walk so far to reach his car, but he couldn't find parking at the hospital. He had to park on the side of the road. He'd get in his vehicle and drive off with a new plan to... That's odd. Something's wrong. The brakes aren't working. And he's heading for... Oh, cheese balls! Columbo just drove through an intersection and was hit by another car. I don't understand. I mean, sure, his car is an unreliable hunk of junk, but it hasn't broken down in 50 years. Hang on, let me see the script. Okay, Veronica slaps Heather. Columbo visits Martha. JD and the bystanders watch Columbo crash. Oh. Oh. Oh no. Folks, JD has proven to be far more capable than the average high schooler. He's got a body count of 3, that we know of, outsmarted the local police department, and will later construct a bomb capable of wiping out the entire student body. So it's not a stretch to assume that JD could cut the brakes on Columbo's car, especially since he knows Columbo is fascinated with the recent string of suicides, knows what his car looks like, and is tying up all his loose ends. In the film, Veronica was the loose end, but here, Columbo is the only competent cop in town and is getting dangerously close to the truth. His existence also contradicts JD's whole mission statement that society is superficial and corrupt. I know I've warned you that on this podcast, Columbo does not have plot armor. If he's not careful, someone is bound to take drastic measures. I knew it would come someday, but I never suspected JD would be the first killer to take Columbo out of commission. Unfortunately, that's the only way I see this playing out. Even if this didn't happen, I can't foresee Columbo faking his death like Veronica, or expect JD to blab about his plans to Columbo's dead body. Columbo might find out that JD's dad works in demolitions, but I don't think he would come to the conclusion that JD plans to blow up the school. By the time he concocts a plan to trick Veronica into proving she can forge signatures, it'll be too late. The film will be over. So what happens now? The story plays out as intended. JD goes after Veronica next. She fakes hanging herself and he monologues his plan to her, and she stops him in time before he blows up the school. He goes out with a bang, and Veronica skips prom to watch movies with Martha. As for Columbo, I do have some good news. That car crash of his wasn't fatal. He was pretty banged up, but close to the hospital. He'd need a few stitches, maybe a small surgery, but he'd be back on his feet in no time. Once he's recovered, though, he'd hear about what happened to JD and bring Veronica in for questioning. Assuming she doesn't crack and confess to everything, he can get her fingerprints on file and prove she was at Heather's house the day she died. Whether or not she gets convicted is anyone's guess. All we know is that Columbo cannot crack this case. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you all enjoyed this little what-if scenario. What did you think? Do you agree or disagree with my ruling? Was there anything I missed? Leave a comment down below and don't forget to check me out on Twitter and Blue Sky.